The sun was high and hot, baking the rocks in the western corner of the conservation zone where few animals lingered during midday. But through the heat haze, a ranger watching the trail cam feed squinted at something odd. A caracal. Alone. It was pacing, not casually, but with purpose. Its stride was silent and deliberate, moving in a near-perfect circle around a cluster of boulders that jutted from the dry ground like the spine of some ancient animal. The rocks weren't remarkable. Old granite, lichen-covered, rooted deep into the earth. But the caracal didn't seem interested in the terrain. It was watching the ground beneath it. The footage, time-stamped over several hours, showed the pattern repeating. A clockwise circle, close but not touching the stones, ears twitching with each pass. Then, counterclockwise. Then again. At first, the rangers assumed it was territorial marking, common enough. But there were no signs of urine, no claw marks, no posturing. And the caracal didn't leave. Even after dusk, the same behavior continued. Night vision cameras showed its amber eyes glowing briefly as it paused to stare at the center of the ring. It never stepped into the rock cluster, never touched it, just circled. By the second day, the path was visible even from above. Light tracks in the sand traced a perfect oval around the formation. And still the cat moved. Not frantically, not lost. It was focused. Marie, the senior ranger, leaned over the monitor on the third morning and said quietly, "It's trying to tell us something." No one disagreed. Later that afternoon, when the caracal vanished into the brush without a sound, they sent a team to the site. The ground looked normal, but the pattern had already begun, and the caracal hadn't broken its loop by accident. The morning sun hadn't yet burned the dew off the brush when the field team arrived at the rocky formation. From above, the ring was still there, faint paw prints forming a shallow path around the boulders, looping like a handmade boundary. The caracal was gone, but its presence lingered in the silence. No insects buzzed, no birds called. Marie crouched near the edge of the formation, brushing away loose sand. The rocks themselves were unremarkable, weathered granite, sun-bleached, flecked with orange lichen. But there was something off about the feel of the ground beneath her boots. Hollow? She tapped one of the larger stones with the butt of her multi-tool. Tunk. Then again. Tunk. The echo was deeper than it should have been. Not empty exactly, just wrong. It didn't sound like impact against solid stone. It sounded like something below had space to respond. They radioed in and called for the compact seismic hammer. Jackson arrived later that day with the test rig. He planted the hammer's foot near the eastern edge of the rock circle and gave it a clean strike. The return wave reading came back lower than expected. Beneath the boulders, something was absorbing the force. Not a solid shelf, not fractured bedrock. Something looser, something open. They took soil samples. Top layers were dry as expected, but 50 centimeters down, the ground was too dry. No water retention, no density, as if there was space beneath the root zone that should have been compacted. Later that evening, Aaron ran a basic acoustic resonance test, aiming low-frequency pulses into the formation and logging the echo profile. She frowned as she read the data. There were shifts in the return signature, like the frequency of the rock itself was off-center. Not broken, not fractured, just misaligned, as though part of it was being supported by something temporary. None of it was enough to raise alarm. Yet. But when Marie returned to the site at dusk to collect the sensors, she stopped just short of the formation. The ring was still faintly visible in the dirt, but new. Fresh paw prints, same size, same pattern. The caracal had returned, circled once more, and left again. Nothing in the forest moved, and the rock beneath her feet felt just slightly closer to failing. The change came so slowly that no one saw it at first. Not with the eye, not with a camera. Only the sensors knew. Installed just 2 days earlier, the micro-vibration monitors on the eastern flank of the rock cluster began to show tiny shifts, vertical, not lateral. Nothing seismic, nothing even strong enough to call a tremor. But something below the surface was giving way, millimeter by millimeter. 0.7 millimeters the first day, 1.2 millimeters the next. By the third, it was 2.6 millimeters. And holding. It wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't natural either. The rock formation hadn't cracked. It hadn't slid. It was simply lower, and only on one side. Jackson reviewed the numbers again and again. There was no recent rainfall, no freeze-thaw erosion, no burrowing animals large enough to cause the pattern. Something was destabilizing from underneath, and it was doing it with quiet intent. Aaron checked the time-lapse footage from the site's drone cam. At first, the change was imperceptible, but when she accelerated the footage to 300 times over 3 days, the difference became clear. The center stone, the one with the deepest resonance and the flattest crown, had begun to tilt. Not collapse, not fall. Just lean, ever so slightly, toward the hollow side. And the ground around its base had loosened, its edges no longer tight to the roots and lichen. Marie walked the perimeter that evening with a field tablet and a quiet expression. She didn't say much, but she stopped more than once to stare at the same spot, the point where the Caracal's ring path came closest to the base stone. That's where the soil looked the lightest. Not disturbed, not dug, but subtly tired, as though it had carried too much weight for too long and finally let itself breathe. She pressed her boot gently into the dirt. It gave, just a little more than expected. No tremor followed. But when she looked up, she realized something else was missing. No Caracal. Not that night, not that morning. The cat had come, walked its path, and left. It had done its job, and the earth was now beginning to follow. It was just past sunset when the dust rose. No wind, no movement, no sound. The trees stood still, their shadows long and unmoving across the dry terrain. The sky burned orange along the horizon, fading into violet above. But the air stayed perfectly still. No breeze through the grass, no insects humming. And then, without warning, a cloud of fine gray dust lifted gently from the base of the stones. It didn't plume like smoke or explode like a rockfall. It rose vertically, slowly, like ash from an unseen ember, curling faintly, clinging to itself in the open air. It hovered for less than a minute before dispersing without touching the surrounding brush. Marie and Jackson were already at the site when it happened, sitting at a temporary field station just 30 meters away. Neither of them moved at first. They just watched. The dust was too deliberate, too still, not like collapse, more like breathing. They approached the formation in silence. The outer layer of dirt near the ring path was visibly disturbed now. The same loop the Caracal had walked days earlier was marked not just by paw prints, but by subtle fractures in the surface, tiny slits in the dry topsoil where the ground had begun to part. Just millimeters wide, but long, jagged, like thin fingers reaching outward. Marie knelt down near the central stone. The air there felt warmer. Not hot, but strangely dense, like the humidity had pooled in a single spot. She reached out and brushed the surface of the stone with her fingers. It was vibrating. Not violently. Not even detectably at first. But when she focused, when she stilled her own breath, she felt it. A low, inaudible tremor. A hum without sound. Not from the air, from beneath. That night, Aaron checked the time logs from the vibration sensors. There had been no quake, no tectonic activity. But something had shifted, briefly, sharply. A downward pressure wave. Localized to within 10 meters of the center stone. Duration, 0.8 seconds. It was the same moment the dust rose, and at the edge of the infrared frame taken just before dark, the drone captured a single flicker of motion in the tree line. The outline of the Caracal, watching again, ears forward, body low. It stayed for 11 seconds. Then, disappeared into the dusk. The wind never came, but the warning had. By sunrise, the site had been declared unstable, but no one left. Instead, they brought in the deeper scans, ground-penetrating radar with wide-range penetration and layered imaging. The Caracal's behavior had triggered enough concern to justify full subsurface mapping, and now they needed to see what was underneath the stone formation it had circled so relentlessly. The radar didn't return a clean void. It showed something stranger, a chamber, narrow, long, about 9 meters across, shaped more like a slit than a room. Just under 2 meters in height, the cavity sat roughly 4.5 meters below the surface. It wasn't jagged like a natural cave, nor smooth like a water-washed tunnel. It was layered. In places, the ceiling appeared to be buckling from pressure above, while the floor had faint dips, as if it had already begun to sag. No known cave networks existed in this area. No mining history. No records of erosion this deep. Worse, the chamber was moving. Jackson reviewed the data twice. Over just 48 hours, the ceiling of the void had dropped 3.2 centimeters. That didn't sound like much, until you realized it meant the entire surface above it was losing structural support. Slowly, steadily, invisibly. Aaron overlaid the Caracal's walking path onto the map. The ring it traced nearly matched the perimeter of the cavity below. Not perfectly, but close enough to raise goosebumps. The cat hadn't just sensed the ground was weak. It had somehow mapped it, with its feet, with its instincts, with something else entirely. Sensors placed at the four corners of the cavity recorded temperature fluctuations. At 2:43 a.m., a sharp spike, just under 2 degrees Celsius for 9 minutes, not external, rising from the chamber itself, rising from the no heat source, no explanation. Later that day, Marie found a new print, just one, a single fresh paw print, pressed clearly into the dust beside the collapsed side of the ring. Not older, not faded, left in the last few hours. The Caracal had returned. Once. And never again. They marked the edges of the hollow with bright tape and motion sensors. The trees nearby had begun to lean. Not from wind, there was none, but from shifting soil beneath their roots. The earth was tilting inward, ever so slightly. And still, from the outside, the formation looked solid, untouched. But from beneath, it was a ticking chasm. It happened without sound. No warning crack, no ground roar, no screaming trees or rumbling stones. Just a sudden, surreal folding in of the earth, as though the land had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. At exactly 3:19 a.m., the motion sensors on the northern edge of the ring blinked red. A downward spike, followed by silence. Then, the vibration sensors flatlined. Not from error, from disconnection. When the team arrived just after sunrise, the site looked like it had been peeled open. The central boulder had vanished entirely, now lying fractured at the bottom of a bowl-shaped depression roughly 10 meters across. The edges sloped inward, steep but not vertical. The soil had collapsed in layers, exposing roots, broken sediment, and veins of compacted earth that had once held everything together. There was no explosion, no splash, just a settling, like a curtain falling at the end of a long, quiet performance. Jackson walked the perimeter slowly, scanning the edge with a LiDAR stick. The depression was deepest at the center, nearly 5 meters down. He paused at the western side, where the lean of the nearby trees was now undeniable. They stood like spectators on tiptoe, drawn toward the hollow without ever stepping in. Marie crouched at the edge. She didn't speak for a while. Then quietly she said, "If this had happened with one of us standing there..." Aaron checked the logs. There had been one final anomaly at 3:16 a.m., a low-frequency pulse, barely above noise threshold, deep and long. Not seismic, not natural. A vibration from within the cavity itself, like a last breath beneath the surface, triggering the final collapse. The Caracal had not returned, not this time. But the pattern it carved had saved them all. Later that day, the team installed barriers and flagged the area for long-term observation. What lay beneath was too unstable to approach again and too unpredictable to measure with conventional tools. They set up a drone station instead, silent eyes from above. Before leaving, Marie pinned a laminated photo to a nearby tree, a still frame of the Caracal mid-stride just before dawn, walking the same circle it had walked for 3 nights in a row, ears tall, eyes fixed on the ground. It would be the last image taken before the earth fell in on itself. The site was quiet now. No movement, no collapse, no wind whispering through the leaves. The hollow where the stone formation once stood had stabilized, its edges hardening under the sun like a scar in dry skin. It no longer grew, it no longer warned, but no one trusted it. Not completely. Weeks had passed since the collapse, but the image of the circling Caracal still haunted the team's minds. It had vanished the night the Earth gave way. Its final appearance logged just hours before the event. A single lap around the stones, a last look into the ground. Then, gone. Marie submitted the report. It was clinical, filled with sensor data, soil density charts, pressure readings. But at the bottom, beneath the final paragraph, she added one handwritten sentence. The Earth knew, and so did the cat. The footage became part of a wildlife behavior study. Experts watched it over and over, trying to rationalize instinct, territory, a heat anomaly the animal detected. But none of it explained the precision. The Caracal had mapped the shape of the danger without ever stepping into it. In the final analysis, Jackson wrote, "The collapse would have occurred either way, but without the animal's behavior, we would not have been watching." A small plaque was placed on a stake just beyond the exclusion zone. It bore no technical terms, no geological warnings. Just a simple message. Watched by one, understood by few, prevented in time. And beside it, a still image of the Caracal, poised, circling, silent. Nature hadn't shouted, it had whispered. And someone this time had listened.